The man had 30 seconds to live, and he didn't even know it. Lionel Voss sat at the head of the table like he owned the building, because he did. 42 floors above Manhattan, in a conference room that cost more per square foot than most people's apartments, he watched the German delegation across the mahogany table and waited for his interpreter to say something useful. Heinrich Brandt said something in German, something short, something that made the three men beside him exchange a look that lasted less than a second. Lionel's interpreter, a Columbia-educated man named Prescott, who charged $400 an hour, leaned toward Lionel's ear and murmured, "He says the terms are acceptable, pending review." Across the table, the German delegates picked up their water glasses in near-perfect unison. Lionel nodded slowly. "Tell him we appreciate their flexibility." What Heinrich Brandt had actually said was, "Tell the others, we take the licensing rights and walk out of here by 9. If he signs, we bury him in litigation before Christmas." But Prescott didn't know that. Prescott had studied German at Columbia and spent 3 semesters in Berlin and could order excellent bratwurst. He had never, not once in his career, sat across from someone actively trying to dismantle a billion-dollar company from the inside of a negotiation room. Lionel Voss was 30 seconds from agreeing to terms that would hand over the proprietary licensing framework his father had spent 20 years building, and the only person in the room who understood every word being said. In German, in the clipped French, the delegate on the left kept whispering to his colleague, and in the quiet Russian that Brandt's legal advisor muttered into his sleeve, was the woman pushing a cleaning cart past the glass wall of the conference room. Her name was Ruthie Callahan. She was 29 years old, 5'3", and built, as her grandmother used to say cheerfully, like a woman who enjoyed her life. She wore a grey uniform 2 sizes too large because the building's facilities manager ordered supplies by guessing, and she had worked the 42nd floor every Tuesday and Thursday night for the past 14 months. She had also, quietly and without telling anyone, earned a degree in international linguistics from the University of Michigan, spent 2 years doing contract translation work for a firm in Brussels, and taught herself Russian from library books during the 2-hour commute she made every day on the subway. She was not supposed to be on this floor tonight. The 42nd floor went dark at 6 on meeting nights. She knew that. Everyone in facilities knew that. But the freight elevator had jammed on 39. Her cart was already loaded, and the supervisor had told her, specifically, irritably, while eating a sandwich, that the executive bathrooms needed to be done before close, regardless of what the schedule said. So she had taken the stairs. She had heard the voices before she reached the hallway. Not unusual, she had learned to work around late meetings, to move quietly, to become furniture. She had rounded the corner with her cart, intending to cut through the east corridor to the bathrooms, when the words stopped her. Not the volume. The meaning. "Tell the others. We take the licensing rights and walk out of here by 9. Ruthie stood very still. Her cart made a small metallic tick as it settled. She looked through the glass wall. 12 men in suits. One man at the head of the table she recognized from the building directory. Lionel Voss, whose photograph was on the 42nd floor lobby wall next to his father's. Beside him, an interpreter she did not recognize was nodding with the confident incompetence of someone who had never been tested. Brandt was speaking again. The subsidiary clause is already drafted. By the time their lawyers read it, the parent company will have no standing to contest. The French delegate laughed softly in French. Under his breath, he said to the man beside him, "They really don't know." Ruthie's hands tightened on the cart handle. She should keep walking. She knew that. She had a cart full of supplies, a supervisor who was already annoyed with her, and absolutely no business inserting herself into a private negotiation on a floor she was barely authorized to be on. She was the cleaning lady. She was invisible. She was supposed to stay that way. Brandt leaned forward and in Russian, clean, deliberate, meant to be private, said to his legal advisor, "Make sure the signing pen is ready. This ends tonight." Ruthie let go of the cart. She pushed open the conference room door. Every head turned. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. The way silence gets when something has happened that no one has a script for. Lionel Voss looked at her the way people look at something that has appeared in a place it definitionally should not be. His eyes moved from her face to her grey uniform to the yellow rubber gloves still on her hands. "Can I help you?" His voice was controlled, barely. "I need to speak with you," Ruthie said, "right now, privately." The man beside Lionel, she would learn his name later. His name was Garrett. He was head of legal, actually laughed, not unkindly. Just the automatic laugh of a man who has encountered something absurd. "Ma'am, this is a closed negotiation." "I know what it is," Ruthie said. She did not raise her voice. She had learned, somewhere between Michigan and Brussels and the 42nd floor, that the quieter you spoke in a room like this, the harder people worked to hear you. And your interpreter has made 3 significant errors in the last 5 minutes, the most recent of which will cost you the licensing framework your company was built on. The room went very, very still. Brandt was watching her now. His expression had not changed exactly, but something behind his eyes had shifted. She saw it. She had been trained to see it. "Mr. Voss," she said, looking directly at Lionel, "you have about 6 minutes before they expect you to pick up that pen." Lionel Voss looked at her for a long moment. He was not, she would think later, a stupid man. He was a proud man, which is a different problem, but in that moment, something made him set pride aside. Maybe it was the way she was standing. Maybe it was that she hadn't flinched when the room laughed. Maybe it was the 6 minutes. "Step outside with me," he said. Garrett followed them into the hallway. So did Prescott, the interpreter, who looked like a man preparing to be outraged on principle. "Who are you?" Garrett asked. "Ruthie Callahan. Facilities 39th through 42nd floors, and you speak German. German, French, Russian, Mandarin, Spanish, Portuguese, and enough Dutch to get by." She paused. "And English, obviously." Prescott drew himself up. "I have a degree from. You translated Wir nehmen die Lizenzrechte as the terms are acceptable pending review," Ruthie said. Not unkindly, just precisely. "It means we take the licensing rights. There's no pending review. There's a subsidiary clause already drafted. You wouldn't have seen it because it's buried in the addendum, which was written in a mix of standard German and Austrian legal dialect that," she paused, "reads differently." Prescott opened his mouth, closed it. Garrett looked at Lionel. Lionel was looking at Ruthie. He had the expression of a man recalibrating something fundamental. "You have 5 minutes," he said. She told him everything. She told him what Brandt had said, what the French delegate had whispered, what the Russian legal advisor had muttered into his sleeve. She told him about the subsidiary clause and the litigation timeline, and the fact that the pen on the table, she had seen this before in Brussels, was a symbolic gesture designed to make the signing feel inevitable, the way you put a contract in someone's hands to create the physical impulse to sign. Garrett was on his phone before she finished the 3rd sentence. When they walked back into the conference room, it was Lionel who spoke first, in German. Not perfect German, but accurate German, stripped of warmth, the German of someone who had been briefed 30 seconds ago and was using it like a tool. "We'll need the addendum reviewed before we proceed, specifically the subsidiary clause." The color left Heinrich Brandt's face like water draining from a tub. The meeting ended without a signature. Brandt and his delegation left at 8:53, 7 minutes ahead of their own deadline, with the blank-faced efficiency of people executing a controlled retreat. The French delegate said nothing at all on his way out. The Russian legal advisor did not look up from his phone. Garrett spent 45 minutes on the phone with outside counsel. Ruthie Callahan retrieved her cart from the hallway, finished the executive bathrooms, wiped down every surface with the particular thoroughness that came from doing a job correctly, regardless of whether anyone was watching, and took the freight elevator, now repaired, back down to 39. She was restocking her cart in the supply closet when she heard footsteps. Lionel Voss looked. In the fluorescent light of a supply closet on the 39th floor, like a man who had spent the last hour in a different century and was still finding his footing. His jacket was off. His tie was loosened. He looked younger than his photograph. "I've been looking for you for 40 minutes, he said. "I still had the bathrooms on 39. He stared at her. "You still?" He stopped, ran a hand over his face. "You saved my company tonight." "I translated a conversation," she said. "Your security team saved your company. You need better interpreter vetting." "I know." He leaned against the door frame. "Garrett is all ready. I know." He looked at her again, that look. She was beginning to recognize it. The look of a person encountering something that doesn't fit the box they'd already built for it. How does someone with your qualifications end up on the cleaning crew of a midtown office building? She considered giving him the short answer. She gave him the true one instead. "I came back from Brussels 2 years ago when my mother got sick. The translation firm I worked for doesn't have a New York office. Freelance work isn't consistent enough when you're paying medical bills. Facilities work is, it's steady. It's nights, which means I can be home during the day." She looked at the cart in front of her, at the bottles of cleaner lined up by size, which was how she had always organized them. "I'm not embarrassed by it. I didn't say you should be. People usually imply it." He was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to offer you a position," he said, "in-house. Head of International Linguistic Consulting. We have partnerships in 11 countries and apparently an interpreter vetting process that needs to be rebuilt from scratch." A pause. "The salary would be, I'd need to see the terms first." He blinked. Then, for the first time since she had walked into that conference room, Lionel Voss smiled. It changed his face considerably. "Of course you would," he said. The offer was real. Ruthie read the contract 3 times, flagged 2 clauses that needed clarification, and signed it on a Friday afternoon in Garrett's office, while Garrett watched her annotate a legal document with the focused attention of a man reassessing several previous assumptions. She gave 2 weeks' notice to the facility supervisor, who took it with the philosophical resignation of someone who had seen stranger things. She started on a Monday. The Voss Group's international division operated out of the 38th floor, which was 4 floors below where she had been cleaning for 14 months. The first time she walked in, wearing something other than a grey uniform, she passed 3 people who had worked in that building, as long as she had. 2 of them looked right through her. One, a woman from accounting named Patricia, who had always said good morning in the elevator, looked her in the eye and nodded. That nod meant something. Ruthie wasn't sure she could explain what, but it did. The work was what she had trained for. It was also harder than she had expected, not because of the languages, but because of the culture of a place that had never had someone in this role before. She was the first, which meant there was no template, no predecessor, no one to tell her where the landmines were. She found them herself. She always had. 3 weeks in, she sat in on a partnership call with a firm in Hamburg. The Voss Group's representative made a joke that translated correctly but landed, in German cultural context, as a fairly serious insult. Ruthie sent a follow-up email in German before the call was over. The Hamburg firm responded warmly. The representative who had made the joke never knew any of it had happened. Lionel knew. He had been on the call. He stopped by her office afterward, a small office, a real one, with a door that closed and a window that looked out at the side of another building, and said simply, "Good catch," she said. "It's what I'm here for." He lingered in the doorway in the way that she was beginning to recognize as his particular version of not being finished with a conversation. "Hamburg is sending a delegation in October," he said. "I'd like you to lead the reception brief, the linguistic portion, all of it." She looked up from her screen. He was watching her with that expression again, the one she had first seen in the conference room, the one that was not quite surprise, and not quite something else, but lived somewhere between the two. "All right," she said. October came with the efficiency of things that are scheduled. The Hamburg delegation was 4 people, efficient, formal, and carrying the particular wariness of people who had been in one bad negotiation already and were prepared for another. Ruthie met them at the elevator bank. She spoke to them in German before they had their coats off. Not business German, the formal register that created professional distance, but the slightly warmer register of people who had agreed, cautiously, to trust each other. The senior delegate, a woman named Anna Lice, who had the handshake of someone who had earned it, looked at Ruthie for a moment with a recalibrating expression that Ruthie was intimately familiar with. Then Anna Lice said, "In German, you're the one who caught the claws." Ruthie said, "I was in the right place." Anna Lice said, "No, you were paying attention. That's different. The dinner went well. The follow-up meetings went well. The partnership framework was signed on the second day, without ceremony, over coffee, the way agreements get made when everyone in the room actually trusts what they're reading." Garrett told her afterward that it was the cleanest international close he had seen in 11 years. She thanked him. He said, "I'm not sure I'm the one you should be thanking." She was packing up on a Wednesday evening, later than she meant to stay, a habit from years of night shifts that she was slowly unlearning, when Lionel appeared in her doorway. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that he was carrying 2 cups of coffee, and he had the look of a man who had walked down the hall with a reason and was now slightly uncertain whether the reason was as reasonable as it had seemed from further away. She took the coffee. It was from the place on the corner. He had ordered it right. She had never told him how she took it. "You've been here for 4 months, he said. 14 months on the floors above. 4 months in this office. I know." He leaned against the wall instead of the doorframe this time, which was, she noted, a slightly longer commitment. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something, and I keep getting the phrasing wrong." She waited. She was good at waiting. It was a linguistic skill as much as anything. Silence created space, and space was where people told you what they actually meant. "I look forward to when you're on calls," he said carefully. "Not for the calls. I look forward to the part before and after." He stopped. "That's still not right." "It's clear enough," Ruthie said. He looked at her. She had been here before, sort of. Not in this office, not with this particular man, but in the general geography of a moment where someone was trying to say something that required them to be less certain than they were used to being. She had spent her career learning other people's languages. She knew what it looked like when someone was translating from the inside out. "Is this something I'm imagining?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I need you to understand something first." She set down her coffee. "I've spent the last 14 months being invisible in this building. Before that, I spent 2 years in a field where I was very good at what I did, and it still didn't feel like it belonged to me fully because I was always the support, always the background, always the person who made other people's conversations work." She looked at him directly. "I'm not interested in being background again, not in any context." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a man actually listening, which was rarer than it should have been. "I know," Lionel said, "that I noticed you first for what you could do for the company. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because you'd see through it anyway, and then I'd have a trust problem on top of everything else." He paused. "But somewhere around the second week, when you flagged the Hamburg phrasing before I'd finished reading the brief, what I noticed was," he stopped again, not struggling exactly, searching, "the way you think, the way you see things other people don't see." He looked at his coffee cup. "I notice that constantly. It has nothing to do with the company." Ruthie was quiet for a moment. "The coffee is from the corner place," she said. "Yes, you ordered it right. I pay attention," he said. And then, because he was not actually an unobservant man, "You're not the only one." She said yes, eventually. Not that night. That night she finished packing her bag and took the elevator down and walked to the subway and sat with it the way she sat with any text, in a language she was still learning, patient, turning it over, finding the structure underneath. She said yes, 3 weeks later, over dinner, at a restaurant she had chosen and made a reservation for herself, because she had found in 4 months that Lionel Voss made excellent decisions when given good information and occasionally needed someone to provide the information he didn't know he was missing. He was, she discovered over the following months, someone who listened, really listened. Not the performance of listening, not the patience of a man waiting for his turn to speak, but the actual attention of someone who understood that what a person said and what they meant were not always the same thing, and who had decided with Ruthie to learn the difference. She never went back to the supply closet on 39. But sometimes, late in the evening, when she passed the freight elevator bank on her way out of the building, she thought about the woman who had stood in that hallway with a cleaning cart and heard something no one else had been listening for. She thought about the 30 seconds. She thought about what it cost to speak in a room where no one expected you to have anything worth saying, and she thought, worth it. Every time.